So our final presentation today is from Dan Jarvis from the British Divers Marine Life Rescue. And Dan is going to be talking about marine mammal rescue in Britain. So over to you, Dan.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. This has been a really good morning. I've learned lots already. So hi there everyone, my name's Dan Jarvis from British Divers Marine Life Rescue. I'm just going to be telling you a little bit about what our charity does and some of our activities nationally in terms of call out figures and a bit of data, and then we'll focus in towards the end on a little bit of some of the local activity and incidents that we've had, most of them quite recently. But to start off with, in our history, we originally started in 1988 when a group of divers came together to help rescue seals that were being affected along the entire east coast of England, but also across other North Sea countries as well, from a new virus that had never been recorded before called phocine distemper virus. So it's the same as canine distemper virus, essentially, but just the seal version of it. Now, this hadn't happened before, and unfortunately thousands and thousands of seals were affected along all of these coasts, and a lot of them were picking up secondary infections, including septicemia and pneumonia, and that was actually what was killing the large majority of them off, because this virus made them quite lethargic, gave them breathing difficulties and lung infections, and neurological signs as well. So quite a nasty disease. Now, there was no vaccine or anything like that back then, so all the people could do who were involved back then in the early days was to try and pick the seals up off of the beaches and get them into rehabilitation centres. So the main one that took part in this was in Norfolk, which is what is now East Winch RSPCA Hospital. And as I say, this group of divers came together to help the RSPCA and others get these seals off the beaches and into care where they could be taken care of by vets and treated as best as they could. So it was all completely new, and this is where the divers comes from in our title. It's more of a historical reference. You don't have to be a diver to be a part of our organisation. And over the intervening years, they got involved in many things, such as going to the Faroe Islands and exposing some of the dolphin drive hunts, which still go on today, and other things like responding to shipwrecks, such as the Brea in Shetland and the Sea Empress in southwest Wales, and rescuing wildlife casualties there. But unfortunately, in 2002, there was a second outbreak of PDV, which again did the same as what it did in 1988 and affected a lot of the North Sea countries coming across from Denmark, Germany and the Netherlands, jumped across to the UK, and again along the majority of the east coast of England and just up into Scotland, I believe, as well. Again, many animals were affected, and I apologise for the possibly graphic photos that might occasionally crop up in this presentation, but it is kind of the reality of what we're dealing with, which was large numbers of casualties. A lot of them didn't survive, and only a quarter of those that were rescued and taken for rehabilitation actually survived to be released, because it is just such a nasty disease. That's another big sort of event in our history. Luckily, I would say, we haven't seen PDV return. It's only struck twice with a 14-year interval, so if there is some sort of interval between this occurring, then we are overdue. That is something that has us a little bit concerned, is that it could happen again, could very well happen again, and hopefully we can be more prepared for it again as we were in 2002 compared to 1988. Something else that people might remember us for was the whale, the northern bottlenose whale that swam up the River Thames in 2006 into central London, which was televised live throughout the day by the many media organisations that followed this incident throughout the day. The chap with the dark hair that you can see on the left-hand side of the animal, to our left-hand side of the animal, is one of our directors, Mark Stevens, who led that particular incident alongside an experienced marine mammal vet, Paul Jepson, from the Zoological Society of London. And this is a species, I'm going to refer back to Bex's talk now, this is a species that isn't found in the North Sea at all. This is a deep diving species found way off the west coast of the UK, beyond the continental shelf, diving down at least a couple of thousand metres in search of things like squid So they're a very specialised species, and obviously this animal coming into the North Sea is not good news. It's not particularly deep, particularly once you get into the Thames, of course, and it's going to struggle to feed. And this animal, as it inevitably turned out, once it was out of the water on that barge and they were trying to transport it out to the sea again, once they'd done the full assessment with Paul Jepson there, found it to be in quite poor condition. And at the point that they'd made the decision that this animal would have to unfortunately be put to sleep, it actually up and died of its own accord anyway. But it's one of the biggest incidents of its kind pretty much anywhere in the world to be televised live to about 600 million people throughout the day as this event unfolded. So there was a huge amount of pressure on the team, who were working, of course, in conjunction with many others, including the Coast Guard, the RNLI, Port of London Authority, Police, Fire and Rescue Service, and many, many others behind the scenes as well. So there's just a few more photos here that just show you a little bit more about the incident as it unfolded here. But from this incident, we did learn an awful lot about deep diving whales coming into the North Sea. So this includes things like Cuvier's beaked whales, Sowerby's beaked whales, and also sperm whales as well. And we have had strandings of these in the years since along the east coast of England, and then inevitably again we're always finding them to be in poor body condition because they've not been able to feed. They're completely out of habitat. And they have a really poor prognosis. So even if they did get put back in the water, the likelihood is that they'd either die at sea or restrand on the shore and die. Quite recently, actually, we have had a couple of northern bottlenose whales around in the southern North Sea, and also a couple of Sowerby's beaked whales as well. They've been dotting around off Suffolk and Norfolk. They've also been seen in the Netherlands. And we think all of those animals have now stranded and have sadly died, unfortunately. They just really struggle to seem to find their way out. It's a little bit of a whale trap in that area. Once they get into the southern North Sea, it's really, really hard for them to find their way out through the English Channel or to get back out up the top of Scotland and around again. So yeah, just really a circumstance of nature and of geography that this does happen from time to time. Usually once you get one, you get a few within a short space of time, but it does happen, and protocols obviously are informed by what we learn from previous strandings, which is that these animals just don't have a very good chance at all. It might be a different story in other areas such as the west coast of Scotland. There might be opportunities there, and indeed we have had a couple of northern bottlenose whales in the Loch Fyne area recently and around the Isle of Arran, and they've been monitored for the last 3 weeks or so, and are hopefully now making their way out. They sort of disappeared in the last few days and seem to be popping up occasionally, but they do seem to be making their way back out to sea, which is better news, of course. Now, for people who are interested in getting involved in our organisation, as I say, you don't have to be a diver. We do run training courses for people to come along and learn all about marine mammal rescue, species identification, a little bit of ecology and biology. And we also do practical exercises with life-size models. So we have a seal pup model and a whale and a dolphin. And we go out on the beach and get you stuck into using specialist rescue techniques and equipment on how to help these animals and provide first aid and do assessments, work alongside veterinarians, especially in the cases of cetaceans, as we always use those for our decision making with these species. And again, try and do what we can for the animal that's in the best interests of its welfare based on its health condition, of course. So say for anyone that is interested, you can find out more on our website, and we have got courses in the area actually at the moment too. So this is all training for everyone to join our rescue teams around the country, and they can help get involved with looking after these animals whenever they get reported to our hotline. So I'll now move on and look at some of the data. So when I say call outs, just a caveat first of all, this is all call outs that we get to our hotline. So it includes actual call outs to animals that end up being rescued, as well as the call outs that we get to animals that have been reported in distress that do actually sometimes turn out to be rocks that are misidentified as cetaceans close inshore, or seals that look to be struggling for some reason. So we do get quite a wide range of interesting calls on our hotline. And if we just look at the last few years of data, this is nationally for the whole country. In 2016, we had 868 call-outs, 2017, just over 1,000, 2018, just short of 1,500, 2019, not far off 2,000, and so far, sorry, up to the end of July in this year, we're up to 1,033 call-outs, which in the same period last year, we very conveniently were on exactly 1,000 call-outs, so we're a little bit ahead again. And obviously you can see that our call-outs are increasing quite significantly by about 20 to 25% each year, year on year. And there's a few reasons for this, we believe, one of them being just simple public awareness. More and more people know who we are, who to call. Technology such as phones especially makes it a lot easier for people to look up numbers and contact people and report things that they are concerned about. So that's definitely one of the reasons. Another one is just generally increasing human populations on the coast, or tourism, visitors to the coast, as well as increasing coastal activities. And I think this has been sort of referred to in earlier presentations this morning, that we are seeing more and more activity on the coast. There's new activities such as paddleboarding and kayaking that are becoming much more popular, and also coasteering in some places as well. So we're definitely getting more and more reports as there are more people on the coast, and they are more likely to find things or potentially cause disturbance to animals as well, which may end up then resulting in us getting a call if there's a problem with the animal's welfare. The other thing that's also changed in recent years is down to climate change, and this is more something that affects the west coast but does still definitely have an effect on the east coast of the UK. And this is during this time of the year now, so autumn going into winter, we're getting more frequent and more severe storms coming in off of the Atlantic, and this is coinciding particularly with our grey seals pupping time, as we heard about earlier. And this means that we're getting a lot more casualties called in, as they're getting separated from their mums, dashed on rocks and injured, and all sorts of things happening to them in these storms. So we have these very acute periods when we have the worst storms, especially if they coincide with the big spring tides, where there's a lot of casualties in the immediate aftermath that we're trying to deal with alongside our colleagues working in the rehabilitation centres, such as Mablethorpe Seal Sanctuary and Natureland down at Skegness, East Winch and Hunstanton in Norfolk, for example. So it's, you know, there's a huge amount of work that goes into trying to look after these animals or monitor them on the beaches to try and keep them safe. Now, if we break down the monthly data now, you can see that particularly in the winter with the grey seals, this is largely what is driving our call-out figures. Over 90% of the call-outs to our hotline actually involve seals, in fact. And because of the grey seals having a larger population in the UK than the common seals, this is why the winter in particular, and always around Christmas as well, sad times, we get lots and lots of call-outs and is our busiest time of the year. And then we've got a little bit of a second spike in the summer, which coincides with the common seals pupping season as well. So it is usually the pups that are in the first few days or weeks of their lives that we are getting called out to. Now, what I'd note here, which is really interesting for our circumstances this year, is if you follow the light blue line for 2020, you can see that actually February, March and June are all the busiest months that we've had on record for the number of call-outs that we've been receiving. And you can really see that April and May as well, when we were in lockdown, the call-outs didn't really seem to be affected at all. They were still quite high, relatively speaking, compared to the other recent years. So it would seem that lockdown has had no effect on the number of call-outs that we've been receiving. Now, if we look just at seals for 2019, again, this just gives you a really good idea of the breakdown between the greys and the commons now. So you can see the red bars a lot more prominent in July and August, but then tails off very quickly as the common seals have a much more shortened pupping season, whereas the grey seals, as we heard earlier, have this sort of distribution around the coast, where it gets a little bit later as you go from southwest England and Wales around Scotland to the east coast of England. So the grey seals do have this more prolonged season that starts in sort of September, October, and then lasts through till March, April sort of time, even May sometimes. So just looking at seals, there's lots of reasons why we might need to help them. It could be, as I've mentioned already, the separated newborns that aren't yet ready to fend for themselves and can't take care of themselves. Malnourished and exhausted animals as well, particularly those that have been fighting storm activity as well. We see a lot of those in the aftermath. Infections, including eye problems. Entanglement is a serious issue as well. We are getting more reports of it in recent years, but it's difficult to pinpoint whether that's an increase in the number of animals that are entangled, or it's more likely, I think, my personal opinion is that it's more likely that we're just hearing more about them, we're just getting them reported more frequently, and it's not necessarily more animals that are being entangled. Various injuries as well, sometimes it's storm damage, bite wounds from other seals, or even dogs, as unfortunately we do get a lot of dog attacks, particularly with pups that are washed up and on their own on the beach, especially very busy public beaches. We get a huge amount of public disturbance. So as well as dog attacks, it's people picking them up for selfies and taking them down to the sea and putting them back in the water because they think they're not going to survive unless they're back in the water. And generally causing a lot of disturbance and stress to the animal. Obviously, again, as we heard earlier, seals haul out for really good reasons, to rest, sleep, to digest food, and especially if they're really exhausted, if it's been really stormy, the last thing they need is to be put back in the sea where they're wasting energy, and it could very well tip them between life and death in those cases because they're already potentially compromised in their health and need help. Occasionally, we do also deal with adult animals as well. In the majority of these cases, it does seem to be animals that are in very poor condition, on their last legs sort of thing. In many of those cases, we do end up having to put them to sleep as the prognosis is very poor for those particular animals. Although occasionally we do get opportunities to try and disentangle adult animals, which would survive as well in certain cases too. So when we're attending as volunteers to these incidents, we assess the animal from afar, first of all, to, especially with young animals, check if the mother is still around, as we certainly don't want to separate them. We can safely restrain them using a towel. Obviously, they're still carnivores, they have teeth and can bite, so we don't want that happening, and we need to handle them safely. We'll check them over for any wounds, signs of infections, or any other problems. We can then make decisions based on our assessment on what to do with it, whether it's safe to leave it there or whether it maybe needs to be relocated somewhere quieter but doesn't need rehabilitation. Or otherwise, we can take it in for care at local vets overnight and then move it on to rehabilitation centres, or re-release them the next day if they just needed an overnight stay and a little bit of treatment for any injuries that they have. And we can do some first aid, such as giving them rehydration fluids as well. So here's a few examples of recent seals that have been checked on by volunteers in the Yorkshire and Lincolnshire area. As I say, public disturbance is a real problem, especially if you've got a tiny little seal on a really busy public beach and you can get really big crowds of people around them. But something that we have been seeing in recent years, which is a real concern, is something of an unknown mouth infection. And the next photo is a little bit graphic. I've tried to choose the most viewer-friendly photo. But there's a problem with infections in common seals and their mouths. That seems to have been happening over the last 3 years or so, and we still don't really have a proper handle on what exactly is causing it, and there is now a veterinary project underway to try to do more investigative work into this. But basically this infection is eroding the roof of the mouth through into the nasal cavity, and a lot of these seals are really, really poorly. They're not surviving, and treatments have been quite limited in their success. If the pup comes in early enough and you can catch it early enough, then it's very treatable. But once it's advanced to the stage, as you can see in this photo, the animals just aren't surviving in rehab, sadly. It's quite a nasty thing that's going on, and we're not sure what the cause is, which is quite a worry. So yeah, that's something else that we're dealing with at the moment on top of everything else. Of course, we have animals that sometimes just get checked on and they're totally fine, and we can either monitor them in situ or relocate them somewhere else and let them go. because a lot of the time they do just come out for a rest, and as very young animals they're still very naive and don't realise that it's not a regular seal haul out beach, it's a people haul out beach, and people will go there and interact with them, and they just don't realise that. But by the time they're a few months old, they seem to have learned this, and they start behaving like real seals. So looking at our cetaceans now, this is for 2019's data. It's very, very colourful because it's split down between all of the different species that we had call-outs to last year across the country. It does look a little bit messy, but I'll just highlight the few key ones here, which are the harbour porpoise, the blue, mid-blue coloured bars. So you can see that we get a fair few call-outs to those, especially earlier on in the year last year. Common dolphins as well, we often see stranded around the coast. They're our second most frequently stranded species. And again, you can sort of see a bit of a preference for early on in the year, but also a bit of a blip in August, September as well. And then we have a few other species that pop up from time to time. So we've mentioned white-beaked dolphins earlier. We had a couple of single incidents with those. Bottlenose dolphins, we don't actually get strandings of very often either. And then you can see some of the species I mentioned earlier, such as the salvies and northern bottlenose whales, the sperm whale, the deep diving species, as well as a couple of the baleen whale species, such as the minke whale and humpback whale as well. So those tend to be much more scattered throughout the year because there's so little data with them. It's really hard to pick out trends, but harbour porpoise and the common dolphin really the only two that we can do that with the volume of data that we have coming in. For cetaceans, again, there's similar reasons why they might need our help. It could be that they're, reasons why they become stranded on the shore, I should say. It could be that they're very poor health, very malnourished animals, as you can see in the first photo in the corner. They could be animals that are just out of habitat or get caught out through navigational errors. Sometimes they might come into enclosed areas or very close to the shore when they're not actually that used to it for some certain species, and they can get caught out by tides or enclosed spaces like estuaries, for instance. Elderly animals as well, coming to the end of their natural life, as well as various infections as well that we see in injuries. Calves very occasionally separated from their mum, which unfortunately, unlike seals, we have no rehabilitation option for cetaceans in this country since the captivity industry was closed down in the late 80s, early 90s over welfare standards. There are no facilities suitable for them. But also what I would add is that those facilities are incredibly expensive to run based on what we know from countries such as the USA do. And some of those centres actually have an extremely low success rate. In fact, one centre we know has a success rate of just 2% in returning animals back to the wild afterwards. So it's really not an option for this country, as we get so few animals that wash up that are suitable candidates for rehabilitation in the first place. And various kinds of injuries as well that we see on these animals, sometimes caused by the actual stranding themselves, but also sometimes from other sources, including attacks from bottlenose dolphins on harbour porpoises and other species, as well as very, very rarely we do get boat strike cases as well. So again, with these strandings, when we're attending, we'll assess the scene, do a lot of risk assessment as well, of course, as they're very dynamic situations, try and keep everyone safe, provide first aid to the animal and make it comfortable, reduce stress as much as we possibly can. And as I mentioned earlier, we use veterinarians who are experienced in marine mammals to do the decision making based on the health assessment about whether it's suitable to refloat that animal if it has a good prognosis, or if not, then we will put it to sleep, as again, we're acting in the animal's best interests for its welfare. So again, a couple of local case studies. Just recently, actually, a few weeks ago on the Lincolnshire coast near to Skegness, we had a harbour porpoise that we believe was pregnant that washed up alive one evening, and our team attended and provided first aid to this animal and gave it an assessment, and in conjunction with the vet, of course, made a decision on what to do, which in this case, happily, was that it was suitable to be released back out to the sea again. It seemed to be in overall good condition. There was no obvious reasons why it had stranded. There was no injuries or signs of infection or anything like that. So The team actually tried to refloat it from the shore, as we would normally do, as we practice on our training course, but it was quite stormy at the time, and it was really strong currents and seas that were coming in at the time as well, and it was getting dark. So unfortunately, the first refloat wasn't successful, and the animal did restrand. But with the Coast Guard in attendance, they actually called out the RNLI inshore boats, and they were actually able to load it into there and take it further offshore. And they were able to release it after dark as well, you know, so it was quite a difficult operation, and that was actually successful, and the animal didn't restrand. So fingers crossed, she ended up being okay, as was her calf. A little bit of a throwback now to 2011. So down at Immingham, we had a fin whale, which is the second largest animal after the blue whale in the world. One of these actually stranded alive at Immingham in the mudflats in the Humber estuary. That's obviously not the sort of place where you'd find this species, and a very, very difficult area to work in, as you can see from the photo. And just being a large animal, a difficult animal to work with as well. With these very large animals, you have to wait for the tide to lift it again. There's nothing that we can do to try and pull it out or lift it or anything like that to get it out to the sea sooner. You have to wait for the tide to do that work for you. And it did manage to refloat later in the day, but unfortunately a couple of days later it washed up dead further down near to Cleethorpes. So sometimes that's just what happens with these animals, particularly with large ones where you've got a lot less control over what it does when the tide comes in. But obviously this was an animal that was struggling to find its way out, may have been in poor condition to start with anyway, and that may have been the result of it becoming then stranded. Just to deviate slightly from our marine mammal theme today, I'm sure many of you heard that we actually had a live stranded basking shark as well in Yorkshire earlier this year as well. And here's just a few photos from a couple of our medics that were on the scene. The animal kept restranding in very shallow water. Obviously it's already quite unusual to see basking sharks in the North Sea, but not unheard of. Certainly we do get them from time to time. And this animal did unfortunately appear to have some health problems. It wasn't responding very well to being refloated. The first aid the guys could do with it as well was quite limited, of course, too. And it's very rare an incident in the first place, not just in this country but worldwide. It's very rare for basking sharks to strand alive. So the animal was actually put to sleep in the end later in the evening after it became obvious that reflotation wasn't working for this animal, and it did go off for a post-mortem examination as well, which showed signs that it was in ill health. There's still some tests going on that we're waiting results back on, but there are strong indications that it did have some brain infection of some sort. So yeah, so it's quite an amazing animal to see, though, of course. Second largest shark in the world. We seem to have a lot of second largest things in the world around this country for some reason. But yeah, just a really amazing animal to see. It's just an impressively huge animal and so unusual looking as well. So real, you know, a sad incident, but also a real privilege to get to see one up close like this as well, and learn so much more about them too in the process. So just to round off, I'm actually got no idea how I'm doing on time, so I hope I'm not overrunning too much. Just a few pieces of advice for if any of you guys come across animals that you're concerned about on the shore. You can see there our 24-hour hotline number, so if you do ever find something, please do call us and we can provide advice and assistance as well if necessary too. If you come across a seal, just be aware that as mammals, they can carry what we call a zoonotic disease. That's diseases they can pass to us, and it works both ways. We can pass it to them as well. And particularly any injuries. So as I mentioned earlier, seals can and will bite if they feel threatened and need to defend themselves. So try not to interact with them. Keep people far back and keep dogs under control on a lead to reduce stress and avoid disturbing them into the sea, and don't touch or pick them up and put them in the sea either. They may very well just be out for a rest. They might be perfectly fine, but they don't need our help to get back to the water. They'll do that when they want to. For cetaceans, if you do come across them, again, zoonotic disease is a risk. Again, they're mammals, they breathe air just like we do. Just be aware of what's coming out of the blowhole is basically dolphin bogies, and they're really gross and they will go in your face, and it's really gross and you really don't want that. So just remember that. And of course, these animals are very, very powerful. Don't underestimate that as well. Their tail can really hurt you if they give you a smack, particularly large animals as well. Their sheer size alone and their weight is a risk in the first place. So be very, very careful around them. Try not to put them back in the water if you can help it, because there's obviously a reason why the animal is stranded, and we need to identify that if we can, particularly if it's an animal that's in really poor health. Throwing it back into the sea repeatedly in the hope that one of them might work and it does swim off is the right thing to do is actually not the right thing to do. It could cause a lot of stress to the animal and hasten an unpleasant death, unfortunately, in some cases, which has happened before with well-meaning and well-intentioned people who just need the right advice and assistance. But in terms of advice and assistance, the best things to do is to try and keep it upright, keep it wet, but avoid the blowhole. As I say, they breathe air. Sometimes people haven't always realised this in the past, and we have had cases of people filling the blowhole with water, which of course then drowns them. So again, it's all about the education and the awareness. Try to make sure you're doing the right things by taking the advice or seeking it out if you need it, and of course calling our hotline. So we work in conjunction with a huge amount of other people and organisations around the country, including statutory authorities and emergency services as well. So a huge thank you to all of them. We couldn't do any of what we do without them. And thank you all for listening. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Great, many thanks. Great talk, Dan. And it was really nice to kind of tie in the two previous talks as well, which is really good. We had two questions asked at the same time on exactly the same question from two different people. So Jackson and Adele, many thanks for that. Just quickly, could you explain what often happens to the carcasses of deceased marine mammals after an unsuccessful rescue? And does the Natural History Museum or anyone else still take samples?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So in England and Wales, we have the Cetacean Strandings Investigation Programme, which is run out of the Zoological Society of London. It did actually used to be run out of the Natural History Museum, but it's with ZSL these days. And that is a DEFRA funded project to investigate cetaceans and basking sharks, actually, at post-mortem examination to investigate causes of death, identify trends and contribute to the national, contains the national data set of all stranded cetaceans around England and Wales. They have counterparts in Scotland called the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme, and they're very much working in close collaboration with each other. So we have a very accurate picture of leading causes of death for certain species in the UK, which for some animals like harbour porpoises is infectious disease. For common dolphins, particularly in southwest England where I'm based, is bycatch. As well as other things as well. So we can identify bottlenose dolphin kills, particularly in harbour porpoises, sometimes other species like common dolphins too. The reasons why bottlenose dolphins attack other cetaceans isn't fully understood still. Certainly it's not for predation, as they don't eat the animals that they kill. So there's a lot of work that they're doing, which is really, really interesting. And of course, it helps inform our protocols as well, which is where we learn a lot of how to take care of these animals, how we do our decision making on the beach with whether to refloat or to put them to sleep, and so on and so forth as well. So as long as the carcass is fresh enough, which in our case with the live strandings it is often the case, we'll retrieve them in conjunction with CSIP to get them taken for post-mortem examination. The same can't quite be said for seals. There's not really any funding available for that at the moment. It's something that we're trying to push for a bit more if we can. There is a limited amount that can be done under the Veterinary Laboratories Agency. It's the Animal and Plant Health Agency these days, under their wildlife budget. But there's no proper funding for seal post-mortems in England and Wales at the moment. The Scottish counterparts do have a bit of funding for seal post-mortems though, so there is some more work up there being done. This is part of the reason why our issue with the mouth disease in common seals on the East Coast is being a little bit difficult to investigate, as there isn't proper funding in place for it.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Just one final question, a quick question from Alan Stewart. It says, you mentioned the basking shark that we recently attended. How many shark strandings do we typically get around the UK annually?
For basking sharks, that's the first one that I can recall for certainly a few years. I know we have occasionally had them. I can think of a couple in Scotland that were, again, quite a few years ago now. I can't remember the specifics of them. And again, down in my own area, I know of at least 3 basking shark live strandings, one of which got back into the water by itself and seemed to get away, and the other 2 of which died. So yeah, very, very rare, very, very unusual incidents. As for other shark species, again, it's very rare to get actual live strandings of them. This year, I know of 2, and both of them are actually in Cornwall, again, where I am. One was actually just a little cat shark, which was just found washed up on the shore. So one of our medics actually found it while they were out walking the beach. So they popped it in a massive rock pool and it seemed okay. So they waited for the tide to come back in and it got away. And the other one was actually a member of the public who found I think it was a smooth hound or a taupe live stranded in Newquay Harbour, and they refloated it twice, and the second time it did go out, but we're not sure if there was anything wrong with the animal, as they sort of just informed us after the incident had taken place. So yeah, shark strandings are really, really unusual. We do get odd other things as well from time to time. We've had a couple of ocean sunfish that have live stranded in the past, and also turtles we get from time to time as well. It's usually of the hard shell variety, such as loggerheads and Kemp's wrigleys, which are, again, they're quite out of habitat. It's too cold for them here, and we think they just get blown off course by storms out in the Atlantic, and they move into the Gulf Stream, which comes from the Gulf of Mexico up to us here in the Northeast Atlantic. And when they get here, they're so cold, their body is shutting down, they're not feeding, they're dehydrated, and so on. So they're quite often in poor condition. But the other turtle species is the leatherback, and they're different from the hard shells because they can survive in our waters, and they are seen around the country, usually in the summer. And they're massive. They can get up to 10 feet long. They're like a small car. They're absolutely gigantic, chunky things. So we do get some really interesting, odd and unusual things from time to time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. That was a really, really great talk. There's been a lot of interest in that, a lot of praise, questions coming in as well, recommending your courses. So please take a look at that. So from my perspective, I'd just like to thank all 3 speakers. I think, although it's our first online meeting, I think it worked really well, and also to thank everyone for engaging with the chats and coming up with questions. I think it's really, really, really useful. I'd like to hand back over to Jackson for just to kind of wrap up the meeting, I guess. Jackson, is there any other business, and to let us know about dates for future meetings and stuff like that?
Yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, first of all, just to reiterate what Daryl said, thank you to everyone. If you want to, please give your thanks in chat. Obviously, at the end of a normal presentation, obviously there'll be applause, and you could see people were receptive to it. So by all means, if you please feel free to share your thanks in chat. Just to sort of recap, on today's meeting, that with the 3 speakers and myself, there was a real link, there was a real connection between all of them, between the impact that we as humans can have on the marine environment, and also the sheer importance and necessity of volunteer organisations, whether that be going out and removing litter, whether it be surveying, whether it be financially supporting if you're not able to get out, or doing one of the marine mammal medic courses. So there's a real link there. We just want to sort of drive that home. In terms of the date of our next meeting, it will be I believe that it'll be February 2021. We haven't got we do have ideas for a lineup for it. If you have any topics you'd like to hear about, or any speakers that you'd like to hear from, just drop me a message, let me know, and we can try and put it together into a kind of theme. Yeah, always welcome to hear everyone's ideas. And then finally, just to say that if you do have any updates you would like me to share wider, just drop me an email, and I will get it sorted. Other than that, I think that is it. And again, thank you for Daryl for chairing the meeting. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys, and hopefully we'll see you all again at a future meeting. So great, thank you very much.
Thank you.